Hello and welcome into another Tuesday recap edition of the Hecklers Podcast. I am your host, Gordon Culletto. A disclaimer before we start today: in keeping with the name of our show, my voice is a little bit strained because my co-host Billy and I went to the Charlotte football game over the weekend, Charlotte 49ers, that is, and we beat ECU. We were 9.5 point underdogs at kickoff, and we came back and won. So, as you can imagine, I was heckling the whole time, ECU fans, officials, opposing players. So, I don't really have much of a voice. So, we're going to do our best to get through today's show, as we're going to be looking at another week of NFL action, which is now in the books. And I tell you, this one was every bit as entertaining as we've come to expect from this season. I definitely did not have Kirk Cousins throwing for 500 yards on my bingo card. So that's actually where we're going to start our show today. The Falcons beat the Bucks on Thursday in what would become an instant classic as Baker Mayfield and Kirk Cousins really put on a show in this one. To me, these are teams to watch in the NFC South. Both have the talent across the board to win the division, and if they get hot at the right time, I think they can be effective in a playoff run. Both of these teams seem to just have stars across the board that you can rely on. So I'm really excited to see how far one of these NFC South teams can go. And I think it's going to be the Bucks or the Falcons. Okay, now we're going to move into Minnesota versus the New York Jets. This game was an early Sunday morning game, and the Vikings really toppled the Jets in this one. And Aaron Rodgers really continues to struggle. So in this one, I feel like the wheels are starting to come off for the Jets, and I think the dysfunction is like sure to follow. So I believe that Aaron Rodgers is basically going to turn that team against Robert Saleh. It's going to get really ugly, and ultimately it's going to end in Saleh's departure. And I don't know if Devontae Adams comes to town, if that fixes things, but some dysfunction is coming for the Jets. And I think it spells disaster for their season. Of course, right now the AFC East is up for grabs because the Jets and Dolphins don't seem to want it. So, not quite sure what I mean. Sorry, the Bills and Dolphins don't want it. I'm not quite sure what the Jets will need to do to be able to turn it around, but they're still in a position to take the division if they can just get their act together. And the big question I had coming out of this one is just, where is Breece Hall? This guy was really projected to be one of the breakout stars of this season, and we're just not seeing it. And I think it's hurting the Jets that he is not a focal point of that offense. And I think that they're relying on Aaron Rodgers too much at a time when Aaron Rodgers is just simply not that good. And if you're the Vikings, I mean, just keep the winning ways going and really hope that this Aaron Jones injury is not too serious and that he can bounce back quickly, because he's been a big part of their offensive success and playing off of that passing game. He'll have an MRI on his hip to determine the severity of that injury and the length of time that he'll miss. But I mean, if you're the Vikings, you have to be incredibly happy. You're 5-0. You are, I mean, Sam Darnold looks like an MVP candidate. You have really created a resurgence for him. So if you're the Vikings, you've got to be happy. Just keep up the winning ways. The rest of your division is good, but you've got a couple games on them. So if you can just keep winning, keep that margin, you're going to be all right. Okay. Next, we had Chicago versus Carolina. Not too much to take away from this one because the Panthers suck, but the Bears finally look like what people expected of them. And granted, this was against a Carolina defense that's pretty beat up and not very good. But the offense really clicked in this one for the Bears, and the defense really stifled a Panthers offense that has looked better in recent weeks. So, it's good to see the Bears. If you're a Bears fan, it's good to see their defense playing at a high level and the offense really starting to click and take off. For the Panthers, a forgettable season isn't going to be getting better anytime soon. The defense is really in for a long season without Derek Brown and Shaq Thompson. I mean, there's no talent on that defense without those guys. and they're just going to get beat up by NFL offenses. That's just the reality of it. All right, we've got Washington versus Cleveland. Gonna take a drink for a second here and try to soothe my throat. I'm telling you, heckling is not an easy job, but somebody's got to do it. Okay, Washington versus Cleveland. In this one, the biggest thing to me, and I've been harping on this for the last couple of weeks, is that Deshaun Watson still sucks, and he's a waste of money. He's holding the Browns back, and they should have never signed him. He's a terrible person, a terrible player, and the Browns get exactly what they deserve. Now, with that said, I do think that maybe getting Nick Chubb back, which should be happening soon, could help that team. They really miss having a strong run game to really set up the passing game. But who knows what Nick Chubb is going to be? Who knows what kind of shape he's going to be in? Um, I think the season is probably just about over for the Browns. And I think they need to start to think about blowing it up. And yes, that means figuring out a way to get rid of Deshaun Watson, figuring out a way to move on from stars like Nick Chubb and Myles Garrett and acquire the assets you need to be able to move forward and rebuild this team relatively quickly. Because the thing about it is, like, Myles Garrett's not getting any younger, and you're not in a position to win with him right now. So I think they need to consider blowing it up. I think Kevin Stefanski probably needs to go. And this is what happens when you put all of your eggs in one basket, and one basket that had enormous holes in it and questions about its integrity in Deshaun Watson. So, and if you look at Washington for the Commanders, this team still doesn't, I mean, teams really don't have an answer for Jaden Daniels on the ground. I mean, he rushed for 82 yards in this one. And I think that that's ultimately the difference maker. Like, his passing has not been, like, I know the completion percentage is amazing, but like, it hasn't been so dominant that teams shouldn't be able to make something of it, right? Like, he's just so dynamic that teams are struggling with it. And if you're the Cleveland Browns, like, you play Baltimore twice a year, every year. How do you not have a plan to deal with a mobile quarterback? I mean, to me, that's insane. Like, you play Lamar twice a year. You're not built to handle a mobile QB. That's wild. So good for the Commanders, though. They keep up the winning ways. Jaden Daniels looks like the real deal. And with the Cowboys not looking great and the Eagles not looking great, who the hell knows? Maybe they could end up taking the NFC East. I don't think many people had that on their bingo cards. But as we know, one team usually goes from last to first in their division. Maybe this is the one. Who knows? All right. Next, we have Miami versus New England. I'm not going to spend much time on this, not just because I'm a Patriots fan and this one sucked, but because this game sucked and these two teams suck right now. The Dolphins, they scrape by, but they ultimately need Tua back. And I think if there were questions about how valuable Tua is, it probably should be answered by the fact this reminds me of when Dak Prescott went down and they were debating whether or not to pay him, and he goes down, he's out for the year, and the Cowboys sucked. And it was like, okay, yeah, Dak is a huge part of what makes our offense work. I think you do have to look at this and say, like, okay, Tua is a big part of what makes the Dolphins offense work. So they cannot just, and I know people have said, like, oh, you got to move on from Tua. Well, you better have a plan in place, because clearly this offense is not like a Shanahan offense where anybody can step in and be successful. Like, you are going to need a good quarterback who's ready to play if they are going to take over this offense. So the Dolphins are going to have some tough decisions to make. I personally think that things are okay. You don't hit the panic button. You keep to it. You keep doing what you're doing. You leverage the run game with A-Chain. You keep using Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and just keep making yourself better. I know Billy has talked about blowing this team up, so we'll see what happens. I don't know. It's a really shitty situation in Miami right now, though, without Tua. And for the Patriots, I mean, they just suck. Like, that offense is lethargic. It's terrible to watch. The Patriots are probably the worst team in football right now. And I've seen reports now that the team is starting to turn on the coaches. And to me, that says you've got a locker room of guys who want to compete, who want to win, who want to be competitive, who want to play football, and they feel like the coaches are holding them back. And I could see that. I think uh, Van Pelt, the offensive coordinator, I just think he's not very good. And I think the team doesn't look good. I think if you're like a receiver like Jalen Polk or Pop Douglas, you're probably mad that Jacoby Brissett is out there just with a noodle arm and can't do anything, and Drake May's rotting on the bench. And I get it. If you're the Patriots, you don't want to kill Drake May, but like you also didn't invest in the offensive line. So like you didn't really give them a chance. And I think that's what you're seeing is the frustration of guys who feel like they are competitors and good players who feel like they just don't have a chance because of how poorly built the Patriots roster is and how poor the play calling has been. So just across the board, it's not good in New England. And we're punting on this season. We'll see what happens next year. All right. We've got the Colts versus the Jaguars. Indy actually looked competitive in this one. I wasn't sure how they would look without Jonathan Taylor in particular, but also Anthony Richardson. Um, I mean, the thing about it is like Flacco just continues to play at a high level, and I just didn't expect that. He's playing better than he did the last couple of years of his career before kind of stepping away and then coming back with the Browns. So like I don't know where Flacco's getting it, but if he can keep it up, like it's good for the Colts. They do lose this one. Like I'm afraid they're stuck in this kind of like 50-50 situation where like you're not good enough to win regularly, but you're not bad enough that you lose. So you're kind of just mid pack. And that kind of sucks for the Colts. They're going to need to figure something out. They've got to come up with a game plan moving forward. And if you're the Jaguars, I mean, you barely won this one. Their defense is terrible, and you really, I mean, it was nice to see Lawrence step up and compete in this one. But the defense, like they've invested so much in the defense with recent picks, and they just paid Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker, and it's like your defense sucks. I think this is a coaching issue. I think it's a talent issue. The Jaguars are not built very well, and they're not coached very well. This is a team that's just going to continue to underwhelm. And I mean, they should have been a team that was ready to compete this year. They paid Trevor Lawrence like they were, and they're just not. They're just not playing at a high level, especially on defense. All right, Buffalo versus Houston. The Texans beat the Bills in this one. That really came down to the wire. Um, I just think Josh Allen needs a better supporting cast. I think the Diggs thing, obviously, he had soured on the team, and I think that they just didn't have a plan. And ultimately, I think it's hurting Josh Allen. Like, I think he needs a better supporting cast. I think he's a great quarterback. You got to have somebody to throw to. And he just doesn't have that. Keon Coleman, he's coming along, but like, he's not this Jamar Chase player who comes in his rookie year and is an instant impact player. It's going to take time. And Josh Allen's just kind of out there on an island. Dalton Kincaid seems to have taken a real step back from last year. So in this one, I just think ultimately it's that Josh Allen doesn't have enough around him, because you look across the field and here's the Texans. They lose Nico Collins in this one after a really quick start for him in this game. And it's like, okay, but you still have Stephon Diggs. You still have Tank Dell. So they have so much talent they can, in some ways, afford to lose Nico Collins in this one and still win. So if you're Houston, you got to figure out what it's going to look like going forward if Nico Collins misses serious time. But ultimately, you're happy to get a win over a Buffalo team that people had high expectations. And just 2 weeks ago, I was saying looked like Super Bowl favorites. They seem to have fallen off the last 2 weeks, and they need to figure out a way to right the ship. All right, Baltimore and Cincinnati, another instant classic, a battle between two great quarterbacks who put on a show for us. The Cincy offense is really getting going, especially that connection between Burrow and Chase. The question I have is just, is it too late? Like, have they already dropped enough games and put themselves in a bind to where they can't get out of it? I mean, they're 1-4. It's early in the year, but that's a hole to try to get out of. And if you're Baltimore, you're going to have to be better on defense if you're planning to beat the Chiefs in the playoffs, which is sort of their bugaboo, right? Like you need to. We talked about how in the past couple of weeks it's been defensive run game, defensive run game. You cannot allow a quarterback to come out and just throw all over the yard against you like Burrow did, especially when you come up against a Patrick Mahomes or a Josh Allen in the playoffs. Like you got to be ready. So their defense needs to be better. They've been good all year. I'm not going to panic about 1 week, but they do just need to make sure that they address what went wrong in this one from a defensive standpoint. But a really great job by Lamar to step up and win this game. Um, I think that first loss against the Chiefs this year, and then ultimately getting embarrassed by the Raiders, probably looking ahead. Um, I think that really shaped the identity of this team for this year, in that they're going to be physical, they're going to run the ball, and they're not going to get away from their identity. And in this game, Lamar needed to step up, and he did. So I really do think this Ravens team has kind of turned a corner and is ready to run, quite figuratively and literally. All right, Las Vegas versus Denver. Oh man. Okay. Bo Nix delivers. You can tell I just don't even want to talk about this one because it's like two teams that who cares. But Bo Nix delivers against a good Raiders defense, a Raiders defense that's been kind of a bright spot for them this year. Bo Nix looked good in this one and does a good job. And I think that he's turned a corner from his early season performance. I think he's settled in a little bit. He's looking a little better. There was a little bit of tension between him and Sean Payton, but I think that's okay. Like I think that's just all part of developing a quarterback. And then if you're looking across the field at Las Vegas, Minshew throws 2 interceptions. We've said it for a couple weeks now. It's time to bench him. Like it's time to just give the keys over to Aiden O'Connell. It's not necessarily about wins and losses, but it's about just you got to keep developing Trey Tucker. You've got to keep developing your tight ends, which means you got to have a functioning offense to give these guys chances and give them quality reps. And I don't think Gardner Minshew gives you that right now. So you might as well throw Aiden O'Connell out there. Plus, O'Connell's young, and you never know. You may stumble on something. I'm not going to be like delusional and say that like Aiden O'Connell's a starting quarterback, but you may stumble into something, and who knows, right? Crazier things have happened. Resurgence in people's careers have happened before. So it's worth it to me to start Aiden O'Connell just to see and to also give your receivers a chance. All right, Arizona versus Seattle. Or sorry, Arizona versus San Francisco. Arizona picks up a huge win in San Francisco. And Brock Purdy was really the story in this one. 2 interceptions, a near 50% completion percentage. That's just not good enough. That is not good enough in a scheme where he should be completing close to 70% of his passes. And a scheme where guys are schemed to be open for easy throws. You can't be throwing 2 interceptions. So, of course, this San Francisco team is going to live and die based on how well Brock Purdy executes Shanahan's game plan and his offense. And he didn't execute in this one, and they lost. Their defense is not as good as it's been in years past. We've talked about this. I think that they're struggling because of that. And it's going to put more pressure on Brock Purdy, especially without Christian McCaffrey there, to execute on the game plan. They could have won this one. I mean, it was close, 24-23. But ultimately, it just comes down to Brock Purdy. Those 2 interceptions just kill the team. And then if you're Arizona, Kyler Murray and James Conner combined for 170 on the ground in this one. So, of course, 50 of that comes from one run for Kyler Murray. But really good to see Kyler running the ball effectively. James Conner continues to run the ball effectively. I mean, just you talk about resurgence in careers. James Conner has really been a solid workhorse for the Cardinals over the past couple seasons, and he shows no signs of slowing down. So that's great. All right, gonna grab another drink here before we wrap things up with a few more games. Again, I do apologize, but that is just the nature of things. Okay, we've got the New York Giants versus the Seattle Seahawks. Daniel Jones and Tyrone Tracy really stood out to me in this one. Both put together solid performances in a game where Malik Neighbors was sidelined. Darius Slayton also really stepped up with 122 yards and a touchdown on 8 catches. So, I mean, the Giants this is the annoying thing. You're winning some games now. You're pushing your draft position. What do you do? I mean, Daniel Jones is not the answer. Everybody knows this, but now you're winning games, and that's a problem because you kind of need to not be winning games so that you can get a quarterback to replace him without having to trade up. So that's a little bit frustrating. And if you're Seattle, like your defense is just awful. I was singing their praises a few weeks ago, but I think an easy schedule just hyped them up, and they're about to just fall from grace and fall off a cliff. Their defense is not good. You allowed 29 points to the Giants. Realistically, it was, I think, 22 because you allowed a field goal to get blocked in return for a touchdown, I believe, right at the end of the game. And they were in a position to tie it and take it to overtime, and it just didn't go well. But I mean, if you're Seattle, like this game shouldn't even come down to that. It's in Seattle. Like, no, that's this Seattle team's not good. And ultimately, I just think, yeah, I think they were propped up by an easy schedule those first couple weeks, and they're kind of falling off. All right, Green Bay versus the Rams. Nothing in particular about this one really stood out. These are just two decent teams with good quarterbacks, and that's what we saw. But ultimately, as far as takeaways from this game, Jordan Love really needs to do a better job of taking care of the ball and connecting on more of his passes if the Packers want to be a Super Bowl team. I say that because I just think there's missed opportunity. There are possessions that end prematurely because he just doesn't connect on a pass or throws an interception. And for so long, the Packers' identity has been take care of the football, methodically march it downfield, control the game, right? That was the Aaron Rodgers kind of showcase. And I think Jordan Love has enormous talent, but he can be reckless with the ball at times. So he's going to need to take care of the football if they want to win in the playoffs. And then for the Rams, I mean, it's just kind of more of the same, right? Like, I think if they have their full slate of players, they might win this game. But without Cooper Kupp, without Puka Nacua, there's just not enough offensively for them. And they're kind of paying the price. And I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know if Stafford comes back next year. I don't know if Sean McVay comes back next year. So, like, maybe it's time to think about trading some of your older pieces and looking ahead to what the next iteration of this team is going to be. And I say that not to be like fatalistic, I guess, about the Rams' chances this year, but just because like they're older, they're dropping games, they're not showing signs of getting healthy anytime soon, and we know that McVay's been kind of ready to leave. I just think you have to start thinking about what the next team looks like. And, if an opportunity presents itself where you get to the midpoint in the season and a starting quarterback goes down on a playoff team, I think you maybe consider trading Stafford to that team if they can afford it to help them with a playoff push. Because I just don't think I think this version of the Rams, I think it's run its course and I think it's over. All right. Dallas versus Pittsburgh. Dallas really neutralized Fields' running ability in this one, and they held Najee Harris as well. And ultimately, like that's what led to the win. The Steelers are going to live and die by the run. And in this game, it just wasn't there. And I think that throughout Justin Fields' career, like this is what we see. When the run game's not there, his passing game is just not enough to cover off for that. And ultimately, that's what this was. And if you're Dallas, the defense was okay in this one. We've talked about how their defense has struggled. They looked okay in this one. We talked about how they shut down the run. That's awesome. But I do think that they're missing Dan Quinn. Like they're not getting the sacks. They're not getting the turnovers. And those are the things that Dan Quinn brings. And I think that they're just missing him. And I think ultimately a lot of the success of the Cowboys in recent years, especially regular season, because their playoff record is crap, but their regular season success, a lot of it had to do with Dan Quinn, and he's gone now. And I think that that's impacting them and causing what we're seeing this season where the offense doesn't look great. the defense is allowing a lot of points, and they're not giving Dak Prescott ideal field position on every drive like they were last year. So ultimately, I think they're going to have to work out those problems if they want to compete come playoff time, especially with Washington sort of running away with the division. All right, New Orleans versus Kansas City. This was our Monday night matchup to round out the week. The Chiefs win and they enter their bye week 5-0 despite rocky performances from their offense. I mean, the Chiefs have not looked good on offense, right? Their defense remains the focal point of their success, and the offense really has a lot of catching up to do. It's nice to see Travis Kelce now that the receivers are all gone. It's nice to see Travis Kelce stepping up, playing at a high level, but their offense, they put up 26 in this one, which is good, but like they still have a lot of catching up to do, and they're not a perfect team. They're not this juggernaut that they've been before. I think if a team like the Ravens, and I know the Ravens lost them earlier this year, but if a team like the Ravens comes up against them, the Ravens defense is good enough to hold the Chiefs offense. And I think if Lamar does not forget who he is and the Ravens don't lose their identity of being a running team, I actually think that they should be the favorite over the Chiefs. Despite the results of week one, despite their current records, I just think the Ravens are built better than the Chiefs currently. And if you're New Orleans, you lose Derek Carr in this one. I think the Saints season is starting to kind of turn sour. This is kind of unfortunately Derek Carr's whole career narrative, are the hot start that gets people excited, the high level of play, and then an injury derails things and the season is lost. I just think we're heading in that direction. I think the Saints were always kind of a paper tiger. I think they were kind of, we see that like the Cowboys are not that great and the Panthers are not great. So like they get these two big wins and it's like, oh man, this team is phenomenal. But now they're kind of playing a little bit stiffer competition and they're not that great. And I think that makes sense. I think that they were always kind of beaten up on soft teams to start the year. So that really does it for us in week 5 of the NFL. On Thursday night, we're going to see the 49ers visiting the Seahawks to kick off week 6. These are two teams that need to answer for a rough week 5. So I look for this to be an exciting, close game. It'll be in Seattle, so it'll be loud. We know that. So with that, we will be back on Friday to look ahead to all of our matches from this weekend. And until then, thank you for listening and keep heckling, but be aware you may lose your voice in the process.